Hi, I'm Madison, 34 years old, former senior product ops manager at one of the tech unicorns in downtown San Francisco. It feels strange to say former anything when it comes to Nexora. For 7 years, that company was my world, my focus, my ambition. I poured every ounce of my energy into building their product, watching it grow from a fledgling idea into a powerhouse that eventually commanded a massive IPO. I sacrificed sleep, skipped vacations, pulled countless 16-hour shifts, sometimes fueled by nothing but cold pizza and the absolute belief that I was contributing to something revolutionary. We were a team, a family, even building something incredible from the ground up. But then, as it often does, everything changed. A new executive team swept in, bringing with them a different philosophy, a colder calculus. Suddenly, the passion, the camaraderie, the shared vision, it all dissolved. I went from being a vital part of the company's success story to just another number on a spreadsheet, expendable, easily replaced. And then the axe fell. They let me go without warning, without even the courtesy of a decent explanation, and certainly without any gratitude for the years I dedicated. The real sting, though, wasn't just the betrayal. It was their flat-out denial of my severance deal. Cost-cutting restructuring, they called it, as if that bland corporate phrase could somehow erase the years of my life I'd given them. They treated me like a disposable asset, a used-up resource. What they didn't know, what they clearly overlooked in their haste to discard me, was that I'm meticulously thorough. I read every single line of my employment contract when I first signed it, including the intricate details of the stock vesting schedule. And within those pages, there was a loophole, a small but critical oversight that they, in their arrogance, had completely missed. Have you ever been thrown out after giving your all, after contributing every shred of your talent and dedication, only to be tossed aside as if you never mattered? Have you ever felt that profound sense of injustice, that burning desire to make things right when you've been wronged? If so, tell me in the comments below. I want to hear your stories, because what happened to me happens to countless people every single day in the corporate world. And while it feels terrible in the moment, sometimes it's the catalyst for something much bigger. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. This isn't just a story about me, or about a company's downfall. It's a story about revenge, about betrayal, and about the incredibly sweet, meticulously calculated justice that followed. You don't want to miss how this unfolds. I remember the day I landed the job at Nexora like it was yesterday. I was 27, fresh out of a less than thrilling role at a traditional tech company, and Nexora felt like everything I dreamed of. It was a rapidly growing startup in the heart of Silicon Valley, buzz, zing with an energy that was almost palpable. The founders were brilliant, visionary, and the product they were building, a cutting-edge AI platform for data analytics, felt like it could genuinely change industries. This wasn't just a job, it was a mission. From day one, I dove in headfirst. My alarm clock became a suggestion, caffeine became my primary food group, and ambition was my middle name. I was young, hungry, and determined to make my mark. The hours were long, often stretching late into the night, but they never felt like work. Every whiteboard session, every line of code, every user feedback call felt like we were chipping away at something monumental. I quickly became a star hire, not because I was the loudest, but because I was relentlessly dedicated and deeply understood the product and our users. I had a knack for seeing the big picture while still sweating the small details, a rare combination that seemed to impress the founders. My fondest memories are etched with those late-night brainstorming sessions. We'd order in mountains of mediocre takeout, fueled by cheap coffee, and argue passionately about features, user experience, and market fit until the sun crept over the San Francisco skyline. The air would be thick with ideas, marker fumes, and the collective exhilaration of building. Launch days were like rocket launches, tense, exciting, and ultimately wildly rewarding. Seeing our product go live, watching the user numbers climb, reading rave reviews from customers who genuinely loved what we'd created, there's no feeling quite like it. I was part of a passionate team, a true family, and contributing to something significant. Nexora wasn't just my employer. It was my identity. Part of my compensation package, as was common in those heady startup days, included ISO stock options. I remember reviewing the details, the intricate vesting schedules, the potential for future wealth if the company took off. It felt like monopoly money at the time, a distant promise, but I filed the documents carefully. I've always been meticulous with paperwork, a habit that, unbeknownst to me then, would become incredibly important years down the line. I believed in Nexora, in our product, and in the people I worked alongside. The stock options were simply tangible proof of that shared belief in our future success. And for the first 5 years, things truly did go well. Nexora grew exponentially, exceeding every projection. We moved into bigger offices, hired more talent, and our product became an industry leader. The buzz around us was constant. We were the darlings of Silicon Valley, the poster child for what a successful tech startup could achieve. I climbed the ranks steadily, my responsibilities growing, my influence expanding. I was a key part of the product and operations leadership, trusted, valued, and integral to the company's continued growth. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, seemed to be paying off. Little did I know this golden age was about to collide with a very harsh reality, golden era of Nexara. The one I poured my heart and soul into began to rot from the top down. The shift was so stark, so jarring, it felt like waking up in a nightmare where everyone you knew had changed overnight. The harbinger of this new, toxic reality was a man named Reed Stratton. He was hired as our new CEO, paraded in as a turnaround specialist, a title that in Silicon Valley almost always means a ruthless hatchet man. He oozed corporate charisma, the kind that masks a complete lack of empathy. From the moment he walked through the door, the vibrant culture we'd built, the one founded on innovation and collaboration, began to curdle. Reed's first order of business was to clean house. This wasn't about strategic trimming, it was a scorched earth policy. He systematically replaced long-timers, the people who had built Nexara from the ground up, with his own loyalists, individuals who prioritized execution at all costs, regardless of the human toll. The shift was immediate and brutal. Our shared vision of innovation was replaced by a cold, metrics-driven machine. Every conversation became about immediate ROI, about cutting corners, about squeezing every last drop out of the workforce. The passion evaporated, replaced by an underlying current of fear and uncertainty. I tried to be a shield for my team. Layoffs became a constant threat, whispered in hallways, appearing without warning. I fought hard to protect the people I'd worked alongside for years, advocating for their value, for their contributions. It felt like standing against a tidal wave. Then came the insidious internal policies. There was one particularly insidious new directive concerning performance reviews, dressed up in corporate speak about efficiency improvements, that disproportionately and unfairly targeted women, especially those on parental leave or with caregiving responsibilities. It was designed to push them out quietly, without the messy public spectacle of a mass layoff. I saw the patterns, felt the injustice, and I couldn't stay silent. I spoke up. I went to HR. I escalated to Reed's office, armed with data, with testimonials, with the truth. I pointed out the blatant bias, the negative impact on morale, the legal ramifications. My reward for this advocacy? HR, under the steely gaze of Alyssa Jennings, a woman who could say, "I totally understand," while simultaneously undermining you, quietly red-flagged me. I started seeing my internal profile labeled non-compliant. It was a subtle, almost invisible stain, but it was there, poisoning my record. The whispers began. A promotion I had been in line for, that had seemed like a certainty, suddenly stalled. Meetings I was usually part of were held without me. I'd walk into a room and conversations would abruptly stop. The change was palpable. What had once been respect and admiration transformed into a cautious distance. I was no longer an asset, no longer a vital part of the executive team. In this new, toxic Nexara, I was a threat. My loyalty, my outspokenness for what was right, had turned me into a target. The vibrant energy I once felt for the company was slowly being replaced by a chilling sense of foreboding. I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet, preparing for the tremor that would eventually shatter everything that THE morning started like any other Thursday. I was deep into planning for a Q3 product rollout, coffee in hand, when the email popped up. Check-in meeting of Madison Carter. It was from Alyssa Jennings, the HR director, and Reed Stratton was CC'd. No agenda. No preamble. Just a calendar invite for 9 a.m. A chill went down my spine. The lack of detail, the suddenness, the joint presence of HR and the CEO, this wasn't a check-in. This was it. I walked into the meeting room, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my face a mask of calm. Alyssa sat across from me, her usual saccharine smile firmly in place, but her eyes were cold, distant. Reed, meanwhile, looked bored, flipping through something on his tablet. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of bureaucratic malice. Alyssa started, her voice unnervingly smooth. "Madison, thank you for coming in. We've had to make some very difficult but necessary decisions regarding departmental restructuring." She paused as if expecting me to thank her. Reed finally looked up, a fleeting, almost imperceptible smirk touching his lips. "Effective immediately," Alyssa continued, "your role as Senior Product Ops Manager has been eliminated due to this restructuring. Your employment with Nexara is terminated today." The words hit me like a physical blow. Shock, betrayal, and a surge of blinding rage all collided at once. 7 years. 7 years of my life, my devotion, my unwavering commitment, all dissolved with a few bland corporate phrases. But before the devastation could fully set in, another thought, sharp and clear, cut through the noise. Severance. I had been verbally promised a generous severance package during an executive performance review just 6 months prior, the kind of package often given to long-term, high-impact employees. "And my severance?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, considering the earthquake rumbling inside me. Alyssa sighed, a theatrical gesture of regrettable empathy. "Unfortunately, Madison, due to the nature of this particular departmental elimination and our current fiscal priorities, we are unable to offer you a severance package at this time. It's an issue of cost-cutting restructuring, as you know." A lie. I knew it was a lie. My mind, despite the emotional turmoil, was already racing, sifting through the details of my initial employment contract. All severance was indeed discretionary, that much was true, but the contract explicitly stated a required notice period for termination without cause, a notice period that had not been honored. The suddenness, the complete lack of warning, all screamed of an improper termination. "My contract specifies a notice period," I counted, my voice gaining strength. "And the verbal discussions I had about my severance were explicit. I believe I am entitled to a package." Alyssa's fake empathy immediately vanished, replaced by a wall of bureaucratic jargon. "Madison, as stated, all severance is discretionary on the part of Nexara. Our legal team has reviewed your file, and this termination is fully compliant with your employment agreement. There will be no severance." She practically recited it, perfectly polished and utterly devoid of human feeling. Reed remained silent, a silent, smirking accomplice. I tried to push, to negotiate. I mentioned the years of service, the unfulfilled promises, the glaring inconsistencies. But HR was a brick wall. Alyssa used every corporate buzzword in the book: strategic realignment, fiscal responsibility, difficult decisions for the benefit of the company. It was infuriating. They weren't just denying me. They were invalidating my entire contribution, acting as if I was unimportant, a glitch in their system to be removed with cold efficiency. There was no point in arguing further. They had made up their minds. I stood up, gathered my few personal items from the table, a pen, my water bottle. There was nothing else of mine in that sterile conference room. As I walked out, leaving my decades of memories and efforts behind, devastation gnawed at me. But beneath it, a cold, hard resolve began to form. They thought they had won. They thought they had simply thrown me aside. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't just devastated. I was calculating. And I had receipts that the first few hours after being terminated were a blur of shock and humiliation. I instinctively went home, curled up on my sofa, and stared blankly at the ceiling. But the devastation quickly gave way to a cold, hard anger. They thought they could just discard me after everything. They thought they could deny me what I was owed, both morally and, I suspected, legally. That anger sharpened my focus. I went straight to my home office. Years ago, I had meticulously organized all my employment documents, compensation plans, and legal agreements, scanning them into a secure digital archive and keeping hard copies in a fireproof safe. It was a habit born from cautious foresight. Now it was about to pay off in spades. I pulled up my initial offer letter from Nexara, the detailed contract I'd signed, and critically, the grant agreements for my stock options, particularly the ISO restricted shares. I devoured every line, combing through the legalese. My eyes scanned for anything, any clause, any overlooked detail that could give me leverage. And then I found it. It was like striking gold. Tucked away in the dense language of the very first stock grant document was a unique milestone clause. This clause stipulated that if I achieved a specific, highly ambitious product launch target before the company's IPO, a portion of my restricted shares would accelerate their vesting, essentially converting into early vesting rights, making them immediately exercisable. I had hit that target famously during the product's initial market penetration phase, well before Nexora went public. At the time, it felt like a nice bonus, a subtle acknowledgement of my extraordinary efforts in pushing that product forward. No one had made a big deal of it then. It was just a line item in a complex vesting schedule. But now it was everything. Nexora, in their corporate amnesia and haste to clean house, had seemingly forgotten about this unique acceleration clause. More importantly, and this was the critical oversight, they had never revoked my post-termination access to the equity management portal. Systems are supposed to lock you out the moment your employment ends. But mine wasn't. Whether it was an oversight, a technical glitch, or sheer incompetence, I don't know. But there it was. An open door to a treasure vault they thought was locked away forever. My fingers trembled slightly as I navigated to the portal, logging in with credentials that should have been defunct. The screen loaded, and there they were, unexercised shares. Not just a few, but a significant block of them, the ones tied to that milestone clause, now fully vested. I ran the numbers. At the current market valuation of Nexora's stock, these shares were worth nearly $750,000. It wasn't quite a lottery win, but it was a hell of a lot more than the zero severance they'd offered me. My heart pounded with a mix of disbelief and victorious exhilaration. But I knew better than to act rashly. This was serious. I immediately called David Rhee, a friend from law school who had become a very sharp corporate attorney, specializing in employment law and shareholder rights. I laid out everything, the contract details, the milestone clause, the fact that my portal access was still active, the exact number of shares. David listened patiently, interrupting only occasionally with sharp, probing questions. After I finished, there was a brief silence. Then he let out a low whistle. "Madison," he said, his voice laced with professional admiration. This is gold. Legally, those shares are yours. They messed up. Big time. That milestone clause is ironclad. And if they didn't revoke your access, that's just gross negligence on their part. But you have to act fast. They'll figure it out eventually. You need to exercise those options and transfer those shares immediately. His confirmation was all I needed. The shock, the anger, the devastation, they hadn't gone away. But now they had a focus. They had a purpose. Nexora thought they had robbed me. But they had left a vault wide open, and now I had the key. The game, I realized, was far from over. It had just begun, but with David's urgent advice ringing in my ears, I acted immediately. The portal was still open, a corporate oversight that felt almost poetic given how meticulous I myself had been for Nexora. Within hours, I had exercised all the unexercised vested options that my special milestone clause had unlocked. It felt surreal, like pulling off a highly sophisticated heist from the comfort of my home office. Once the options were exercised, I initiated the transfer of the shares to my personal brokerage account. The process was swift, quiet, and thankfully went completely unnoticed by Nexora's systems, still oblivious to the nearly $750,000 slipping through their fingers. The financial leverage I now held was substantial, but this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. Having secured my financial foundation, my focus shifted. I wasn't just going to exercise my shares and walk away. That wasn't enough. The way they had treated me, the way they were clearly treating others, deserved exposure. This wasn't just a personal injustice. It was systemic. I began to research. My starting point was the very people Reed and Alyssa had targeted, former employees. I started discreetly reaching out to individuals I knew had left Nexora in the wake of Reed's takeover, especially those who seemed to have been pushed out unceremoniously, despite their long tenures or strong performance. I leveraged my network, my insider knowledge, and a healthy dose of strategic empathy. What I uncovered was horrifying, yet sickeningly predictable. There was a trend, a clear and disturbing pattern. It wasn't just me. Women, people of color, and outspoken middle managers, anyone who didn't fit neatly into Reed's new execution at all costs mold, or who dared to question the new regime, were systematically being pushed out. And critically, they were all denied full or any severance, often under vague pretenses similar to my own departmental elimination. The anecdotes flowed in. Stories of sudden performance reviews plummeting, of goalposts being arbitrarily moved, of subtle but relentless pressure campaigns to make people quit. Some had been explicitly told their roles were redundant, only to see them filled by Reed's preferred candidates months later. Others described punitive transfers or being stripped of key responsibilities, effectively forcing them to resign without triggering severance clauses. I compiled everything. Exit interview stories, always anonymized to protect the individuals, became powerful narratives of disillusionment and deceit. I collected screenshots of policy changes, snippets of internal communications that hinted at the discriminatory nature of the new HR practices, and emails that meticulously documented their manipulative tactics. It was a dossier, growing thicker by the day, a damning indictment of Nexara's new leadership. But I knew a personal compilation wasn't enough. I needed to ensure this wasn't just my perception. I needed validation from a higher authority, someone who understood the complexities of corporate law and employment rights. I reached out to connections I had in D.C., specifically within well-established whistleblower advocacy groups. These were contacts I'd cultivated through professional networking events, always with an eye towards understanding ethical corporate governance. I presented my findings cautiously, carefully, looking for legal confirmation that what Nexara was doing wasn't just unethical, but potentially illegal. They quickly validated the severe legal gravity of Nexara's HR practices, especially regarding the systematic denial of severance and targeting certain demographics. This wasn't just bad management. It was potentially grounds for a class action lawsuit. The path forward became clear. My ultimate revenge wouldn't be just about reclaiming what was mine. It would be about exposing Nexara's policies publicly, turning their dark tactics into a beacon that illuminated their true nature. I wasn't just Madison anymore. I was a strategic adversary, armed with data, legal backing, and a potent, quiet determination. Nexara had unknowingly lit a fuse, and I was about to go loud after securing my shares and compiling the damning evidence. The time for quiet maneuvering was over. Now, it was time to go loud. My goal wasn't just to get my story out. It was to ignite a fire, to expose Nexara's practices to a wider audience, and to hurt them where it mattered most, their reputation and their bottom line. I started with a carefully crafted Medium article. I helped build Nexara. They threw me out. You're next. The title was designed to grab attention, to speak directly to the fear and frustration many tech workers experience. I pulled no punches. I didn't name myself publicly, but I used enough insider detail about my role and my tenure that anyone who knew Nexara would immediately recognize it was me. I detailed the shift in culture under Reed Stratton, the insidious new HR policies, and specifically called out Alyssa Jennings, though not by name, by describing her manipulative tactics and the doublespeak she deployed. I cited internal communication policies that, on the surface, seemed benevolent but were used as tools of control and suppression. Crucially, I included anonymized accounts from others, weaving their stories of unfair performance reviews, forced resignations, and denied severance into the narrative. I quoted snippets of their experiences, demonstrating the pervasive and systemic nature of Nexara's abuses. I used the data points from my dossier to support the anecdotal evidence, painting a comprehensive picture of a company that had lost its moral compass. Publishing it felt like dropping a bomb. I hit publish, and then I waited. The explosion was almost immediate. Within hours, the article started gaining traction. First, on Twitter, then Reddit threads exploded with discussions. Former and current Nexara employees chimed in, sharing their own experiences, validating my claims. The comments section of the Medium article itself became a living repository of grievances. People were angry, and they were finally finding a voice. Then, the media picked it up. TechCrunch was the first major tech publication to cover it, validating the legitimacy of my claims and the severity of the situation. Forbes followed, focusing on the corporate governance implications and the potential impact on Nexara's public image. It was surreal to see headlines about a story I had orchestrated from my living room. They called it the Nexora scandal. To amplify the message further, David reconnected me with a producer at a major business podcast known for its investigative segments on corporate malfeasance. I agreed to appear, but strictly anonymously, my voice modulated to prevent recognition. I recounted my story, carefully detailing the timeline, the contractual loopholes, and the patterns of abuse I had uncovered. The podcast reached a different, more mainstream audience, including institutional investors and industry analysts. I talked about everything from the forced resignations to the culture of fear, always emphasizing how it was detrimental not just to employees, but ultimately to the company's long-term health and innovation. The impact was measurable and immediate. Investor confidence in Nexora, a company that had previously been a darling of Wall Street, took a significant hit. That week, Nexora's stock dipped by an alarming 14%. It wasn't just a number. It represented millions, possibly billions, in lost market capitalization. It was a direct consequence of their toxic practices, and it resonated far louder than any internal memo or HR complaint. Reed Stratton and Alyssa Jennings, who had dismissed me with such contempt, were now scrambling. Their brand, their carefully cultivated image of a cutting-edge, employee-friendly tech giant, was burning. And I had lit the match. This wasn't personal revenge in the petty sense. It was a calculated, strategic strike against corporate malfeasance. And it felt incredibly, profoundly satisfying. The moment my Medium article went viral, picked up by major media outlets and sparking outrage across social media, the comfortable, insulated world of Nexora's executive team began to crumble. I could almost feel their panic from across the city. The carefully constructed facade of a forward-thinking, employee-centric tech company was shattering in real time. Internal leaks, now amplified by the burgeoning digital wildfire, started to expose the frantic scramble within Nexora. Screenshots and anonymized messages surfaced on anonymous employee forums showing HR, specifically Alyssa Jennings, attempting to rewrite policies mid-storm. They were desperate, trying to patch the gaping holes in their image to retroactively justify the very practices I had exposed. But it was too late. The optics were terrible, proving exactly what I and others had alleged, that their policies were unjust and one-all. Why being fixed? Because they were caught. The impact of my public campaign quickly snowballed, gathering the collective outrage of those who had suffered in silence. Former employees, emboldened by my story and the national attention it garnered, started connecting. David Ree, my ever-strategic attorney, was instrumental in this. He helped organize the disparate voices, guiding them towards a unified front. The whispers of injustice transformed into a roar. A class action lawsuit against Nexora for discriminatory employment practices and wrongful termination began to take shape. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was our fight. The legal team assembling was formidable, their case bolstered by the meticulous dossier I had compiled. The pressure mounted not just from the public and former employees, but, more importantly, from within Nexora itself. Shareholder confidence had been severely shaken by the 14% stock dip. During the next quarterly earnings call, the Q&A session was brutal. Investors, usually focused on profit margins and growth projections, were now grilling Reed Stratton and the executive leadership about ethical governance, employee attrition, and reputational risk. Questions about the executive team's leadership capabilities under fire emerged, painting Reed as a liability rather than the turnaround specialist he claimed to be. You could almost hear the collective gasp of the analysts as the Nexora leadership stumbled, offered vague corporate platitudes, and failed to adequately address the crisis. Reed, in a move that reeked of desperation and complete misjudgment of the public mood, eventually released a disingenuous apology video. It was a masterpiece of corporate non-apology, full of hollow phrases about lessons learned and commitment to our values, without a single concrete admission of wrongdoing or a genuine expression of regret. He talked about moving forward and doubling down on employee experience. It only made things worse. The internet predictably torched him. People dissected every carefully worded lie, every insincere gesture. It became a meme, a symbol of corporate hypocrisy. The video, intended to quell the storm, simply added fuel to the fire. The ultimate sign that Nexora's castle was truly crumbling arrived not from the public, but from the highest levels of the company. Behind the scenes, away from the screaming headlines and viral social media posts, Nexara's board of directors began a silent, discreet review of executive leadership. Reed Stratton's reign was not just teetering. It was under intense scrutiny from the very people who had brought him in. I didn't need to be there to know the conversations happening were tense, accusatory, and focused on finding someone to blame. And I knew exactly who they'd want to blame. My plan was working, not just to expose, but to dismantle. The satisfaction was profound, the pressure on Nexara was immense. The class action lawsuit was gaining momentum. The media coverage was relentless, and the stock price was struggling to recover. The disastrous apology video from Reed only exacerbated their problems, turning him into a corporate punchline. It became clear that the board of directors, now under intense scrutiny from shareholders, needed to make a decisive move to stop the bleeding. And then, just as I anticipated, David received the call. It was a discreet overture from Nexara's board, not a legal threat, but an olive branch subtly dangled. They wanted to talk. They wanted the story buried. They wanted the fire I had started to be extinguished, quickly and quietly. My immediate instinct was to refuse. To keep fighting. To watch Reed Stratton and Alyssa Jennings face the full consequences of their actions. But David, ever the pragmatist, advised caution. Madison, he explained, they're desperate. They'll offer you something significant. This isn't just about your severance anymore. Use your leverage. You can achieve more than just a personal win here. You can make a statement that resonates far beyond your own case. We meticulously strategized. What did I want? Beyond pure vengeance. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted accountability. And I wanted Nexara to feel the sting of their own policies, not just financially, but publicly. They wanted silence. I agreed on my terms. My primary demand was direct. I would agree to remove my third and final follow-up post on Medium, the one detailing the legal intricacies of the class action suit and the whistleblower contacts. But this wasn't free. In exchange, Nexara had to agree to two non-negotiable clauses. First, they had to grant me a 6-month consulting title, fully paid. This wasn't about the money for me anymore. It was about optics. The irony of them rehiring me, even as a consultant, after terminating me without cause, would be delicious. It would implicitly validate my value, publicly contradicting their earlier dismissal. It was a symbolic re-entry, a foot in the door after they'd tried to slam it shut. Second, and most importantly, they had to issue a publicly acknowledged severance payout. Not just a confidential settlement that would disappear into the ether, but a public statement confirming that I, Madison Carter, had received a significant and appropriate severance package. It would directly refute their initial lie, the departmental elimination that afforded no severance. It would make Alyssa Jennings eat her words, and it would show the world that their denial was based on malice, not policy. We also included language within the agreement about company whistleblower protection policies, subtly hinting at the larger issues at play without explicitly stating them, but ensuring they were on record acknowledging such protections. The board resisted, of course. They counted, they pushed back, trying to reduce the consulting period to keep the severance confidential. But we held firm. David's legal prowess, combined with the clear threat of continued public outcry and the looming class action suit, gave us an unassailable position. They were bleeding. I was a tourniquet, but only on my terms. Eventually, they caved. The settlement was reported discreetly but clearly in business publications. Nexara settles with former employee amidst restructuring fallout. While the exact terms were confidential, the fact that a significant and publicly acknowledged severance payout was part of the deal was clear. The news wires hummed with the details. The damage to Nexara's image was already done, irreversible. But now, the final nail was hammered in. The narrative had shifted. It was no longer just about their cost-cutting, but about their culpability. I remember signing the documents. It wasn't with bitterness, but with a profound sense of satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of rage-fueled, destructive revenge I might have once envisioned. This was better. This was calculated. This was justice delivered with a meticulous, legal signature. The loop was finally closed at signing that settlement, the one with the publicly acknowledged severance and the consultant title, felt like the purest form of liberation. It closed the Nexara chapter, not with bitterness, but with a profound sense of accomplishment and a quiet confidence I hadn't realized I was missing until then. The revenge wasn't about destroying them utterly, though watching their leadership squirm certainly had its satisfactions. It was about reclaiming my narrative, asserting my worth, and proving that even a powerful corporation couldn't simply discard me without consequences. What I didn't expect was how empowering the entire journey would be, not just for me, but for others. The public nature of my fight, the exposure of Nexara's toxic practices, resonated far beyond the tech industry. It sparked conversations about employee rights, corporate accountability, and the often hidden power dynamics within organizations. Now, I channel that experience into something constructive. I run a consultancy, a small but growing firm focused specifically on protecting employees entering high-risk SaaS startups or navigating difficult corporate environments. It's a niche, but a vital one. My approach is born directly from what I endured. I help professionals, especially those in fast-paced, high-stakes tech companies, understand the intricate details of their employment contracts. I preach the gospel of meticulous record-keeping, of understanding vesting schedules, termination clauses, and intellectual property agreements. I teach them to anticipate the hidden traps, the subtle red flags that I now recognize with painful clarity. More than just legal literacy, I help them understand their inherent value and how to stand firm in those quiet, intimidating HR rooms where careers can be made or broken. I empower them to ask the difficult questions, to push back against unfair policies, and to know when they're being undervalued or exploited. My advice is simple. Arm yourself with knowledge, document everything, and never be afraid to speak up. I encourage them to find their voice, even if it shakes, because silence often means complicity in injustice. It's incredibly rewarding. I see the light click on in their eyes when they understand a complex clause or when they realize they have more power than they thought. I get emails from former clients who successfully negotiated better severance deals, who stood their ground against unfair performance reviews, or who simply walked away from toxic environments with their dignity and finances intact. That, for me, is the ultimate victory. Looking back, if you had told me a year ago that losing my job would lead me to this, I probably wouldn't have believed you. The initial shock and fury were overwhelming, but I took that energy, that raw emotion, and channeled it into something productive, something that could help others avoid the pain I went through. So, next time a company tries to shove you out quietly, tries to deny you what you're owed, or treats you like just another cog in the machine, remember my story. Remember that I was just like you, dedicated, ambitious, and then betrayed. But I didn't stay down, and I won. If you've ever felt like the system was against you at work, maybe it's time to learn how to fight back smarter. Subscribe to this channel, share this with a friend who's stuck in corporate quicksand, and remember, revenge is best served with a legal signature and a mic drop.